They told you to fear your shadow, that it's darkness, that it's wrong, that it's something to be suppressed, hidden, purged. But they never told you this. Your shadow isn't evil, it's honest. It holds the parts of you the world told you not to be, the anger, the hunger, the shame, the chaos, but also the power, the intuition, the sacred rage, the pure truth that never learned how to be polite. Your shadow self is not the villain, it's the wounded guardian at the gates of your becoming. And until you face it, not fight it, not fix it, but face it, you'll keep leaking your power into performance. You'll keep running in loops, unconsciously recreating the same emotional patterns in shinier costumes. And you'll wonder why life feels repetitive, why your manifestations fizzle, why you sabotage joy the moment it gets close. It's not because you're broken, it's because there's a part of you you're still hiding from, the part that wasn't allowed to speak, the part that got punished for being too loud, too sensitive, too bold, too much. That part learned to wait in the dark. It watched, it remembered. It held the emotional truth when your outer self learned to smile through pain. And now, it's knocking, not to haunt you, but to reintegrate. Because the shadow doesn't want to destroy your life, it wants to complete it. It wants to bring back the edges you shaved off for acceptance. It wants to return the fire you buried under manners. It wants to remind you, you don't get to full embodiment by only loving your light. You get there by reclaiming the parts you left behind when you thought survival meant silence. Most people live their entire lives trying to outrun their shadow, but you can't outrun what's wired into your soul. You can suppress it, disguise it, numb it, but you'll pay for it in misalignment. You'll pay for it in relationships that drain you, in careers that suffocate you, in anxiety that comes from smiling when you want to scream. And eventually, that shadow will erupt. Not because it's evil, but because it's ignored. Think about how much energy you've spent managing the parts of yourself you've been told are too much. How many times you've made yourself smaller so someone else could feel safe. How often you've bit your tongue, clenched your jaw, and forced composure while your inner world was on fire. That inner fire, that's not dysfunction, it's intelligence. And your shadow knows exactly where you've abandoned yourself in the name of being liked, accepted, or seen as good. But let's be real. Goodness without truth is just performance. It's a costume stitched from shame. And every time you betray your own knowing to keep the peace, your shadow takes note. Not out of spite, out of loyalty. It carries the parts of you that remember what authenticity actually feels like. That's why shadow work is not about darkness, it's about honesty. It's about looking at the raw, unfiltered version of yourself and saying, you're allowed here. Not just the healed parts, not just the spiritual insights and graceful moments, but the mess, the confusion, the rage, the jealousy, the compulsions. Because when you integrate those parts instead of exiling them, they stop sabotaging you in secret. They stop hijacking your triggers. They stop showing up disguised as self-doubt, self-hate, or the projection you throw onto others. Your shadow doesn't want control, it wants connection. And the moment you offer it presence instead of punishment, something shifts. Not just in your psyche, but in your energy field. You stop feeling split. You stop pretending. You stop apologizing for your own wholeness. The deeper you go into the shadow, the more you realize it's not trying to pull you into darkness. It's trying to lead you out of denial. And what you'll find buried in that denial is the most important truth of all. You created a false self to survive. You built an identity that made sense to the world, but not to your soul. You learned which emotions were acceptable, which desires were safe, and which instincts had to be silenced. And every time you complied, a part of you receded further into the shadow. But the soul has a memory. It remembers the whole version of you before the edits, before the trauma, before you started splitting yourself to be palatable. That memory pulses beneath every trigger, every meltdown, every irrational reaction you can't seem to explain. Those aren't flaws, they're flare signals. They're emotional Morse code from the parts of you still waiting to be acknowledged. But instead of listening, you've been trying to fix them, heal them, rise above them. You've been spiritualizing your suppression, talking about love and light while bypassing the very material that's blocking your magnetism. And that's why your growth feels fragile, because it's built on avoidance. But here's the twist no one prepares you for. When you stop resisting the shadow, it doesn't destroy you, it grounds you. It teaches you discernment, it sharpens your intuition, it clears your boundaries. It gives you access to a raw, unapologetic presence that can't be faked. And people feel it. They can't always name it, but they feel the difference between someone who's just positive and someone who's fully integrated. Someone who's not afraid of their own chaos. Someone who can hold space for the truth, especially when it's uncomfortable. That's the superpower of shadow work. Not perfection, not purity, but presence, power. The kind of power that can sit in a storm and not flinch, because it knows the storm is part of the healing, and you're not here to run from the storm anymore. You're here to become the calm inside it. You start to notice the shift when you stop labeling things inside you as good or bad and start asking what they're trying to teach you. That anxiety that spikes in silence. Maybe it's not weakness. Maybe it's a messenger reminding you of how long you've ignored your nervous system. That jealousy that catches you off guard. Maybe it's not toxic. Maybe it's a flare from a dream you gave up on too soon. That rage you've been suppressing since childhood. Maybe it's not dangerous. Maybe it's a boundary you never learned how to speak. This is the terrain your shadow knows by heart. It has recorded every moment you were too scared to feel fully, every time you smiled through disrespect, every time you told yourself it's not a big deal when your heart was breaking. And now, it brings all of it forward, not to punish you, but to give you another chance to respond differently, not to react, not to collapse, but to finally stand in truth. That's the work. Not becoming someone else, but becoming undivided. Integrating what you used to exile, listening to what you used to override, feeling what you used to numb. And in that process, you don't become more complicated, you become more clear. People might say you're changing, you're moodier, less agreeable, more intense. What they're actually feeling is your integrity sharpening. You're no longer playing roles. You're no longer keeping the peace at the cost of your inner war. You're no longer sacrificing your soul for the illusion of harmony, and the discomfort people feel around you. That's not your darkness, it's their disconnection. You've just stopped hiding. And here's what happens next. Your frequency starts to reorganize your reality. People who thrive on your self-abandonment start falling away. Opportunities that once drained you now repel you. Environments that used to feel familiar now feel loud, heavy, false. That's the shadow clearing space, not for perfection, but for wholeness. And once you taste wholeness, you can't untaste it. You can't go back to fractured living. You can't shrink to fit a life you've outgrown. If you've ever felt like you were too much or not enough, it's time to unsubscribe from that lie. Hit subscribe and the bell, not to follow me, but to follow the version of you that's finally done hiding. Now something deeper begins to unlock, a kind of clarity you can't get from books, podcasts, or even deep conversations. This is the kind of knowing that comes from silence, from sitting with your discomfort long enough to hear what it's been trying to say all along. You realize that the parts of you you've been trying to fix were never broken. They were just misunderstood. Your procrastination wasn't laziness. It was resistance to living a life that wasn't aligned. Your overthinking wasn't a flaw. It was your system begging you to slow down and feel. Your shutdowns weren't immaturity. They were trauma responses from a nervous system that never felt safe enough to express freely. And suddenly, you stop needing to explain yourself. You stop needing to be digestible to people who've only known your mask. The mask slips, the armor falls, and beneath it all, there's not a monster waiting. It's a memory of who you were before the world told you who to be. And that memory carries power, not the loud, performative kind, but the kind that hums through your entire being like a quiet revolution. It makes you speak slower, but truer. It makes you walk softer, but firmer. It makes you move through rooms not trying to prove anything, but knowing everything you need is already coded in your presence. That's what integration does. It doesn't turn you into someone new. It makes you finally recognizable to yourself. And once you know that version of you, the one that's whole, messy, fierce, soft, unapologetic, you stop settling. You stop negotiating your needs. You stop choosing situations that require you to betray your knowing. Because now, even when something feels tempting, you can feel the subtle echo of your shadow whispering, "That's not for us anymore." And you listen. Not from fear, but from honor. Because the shadow you once feared has become your guide, and it's not leading you into chaos, it's leading you home. And when you finally start living from that place, where your shadow walks beside you, not behind you, you begin to notice how different everything feels. Not softer, not easier, just realer. Conversations become clearer because you're no longer editing yourself mid-sentence to manage other people's comfort. Relationships either deepen or dissolve, not because you've become cold, but because you've become congruent. The double life ends, the one where your outer world smiles while your inner world suffocates. You no longer tolerate fake intimacy. You no longer mistake performance for connection. And you definitely stop settling for anything that requires you to betray your instincts just to maintain someone else's idea of who you should be. This is when life starts responding, not to the version of you projected, but to the one you reclaimed, the real you, the version of you that doesn't need constant validation to feel worthy, the version of you that can sit in a room alone and feel full, the version that doesn't just understand shadow, but knows how to walk with it like an old friend who tells the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. And as you walk like this, something shifts in your energy. You stop attracting lessons and start attracting matches. You stop recreating cycles and start designing reality, not from fantasy, but from integration. Because now, when you speak, your words don't just sound nice, they resonate, they land, they move things, because they're not coming from intellect, they're coming from embodiment. And people feel that. They might not understand it, they might project onto it, but deep down, they recognize it as truth. And that truth? It's disruptive, not in volume, but in vibration. And this is when you realize you were never meant to heal in a vacuum. You were meant to bring your wholeness into the world, not to fix others, but to remind them of what they've forgotten in themselves. And now you start to notice something almost mystical. Your very presence begins to shift environments, not because you're louder, not because you're trying harder, but because you've stopped leaking energy into maintaining an identity that was never yours. You don't show up trying to prove your light anymore. You are the light, precisely because you've reclaimed your shadow. And this is what people don't get. True magnetism doesn't come from pretending to be perfect. It comes from being real, from standing in front of the world, unfiltered, unpolished, and unafraid of your complexity. And when you show up like that, grounded, raw, sovereign, you give others permission to do the same. You don't even have to speak. Your energy becomes the signal. Your presence becomes the mirror. And that's when your shadow stops being something personal. It becomes a transmission. People feel your wholeness and they remember their own. They feel your non-performance and something in them exhales. Because you're not trying to be right or superior or enlightened. You're just here, fully, with your wounds and your wisdom, your rage and your reverence. And there's something about that level of coherence that cuts through noise like a tuning fork. It destabilizes illusions. It unhooks performative spirituality. It pulls masks off gently but unmistakably. And some will run from it, not because you're wrong, but because they're not ready. Others will gravitate toward it, not even knowing why, just feeling the pull of something ancient, something true. And you don't chase, you don't explain, you don't dim, you just keep walking in clarity. You keep choosing yourself in every room, in every relationship, in every quiet moment where your shadow used to scream and now simply walks with you, close, calm, and honored. Because you're no longer afraid of being seen in full. You're only afraid of going back to living in pieces. By now, the lines between light and dark start to blur, and you begin to realize there was never a real war inside you, only misunderstood signals. Your shadow wasn't trying to sabotage your life. It was trying to show you where you weren't living it. It held the keys to your creativity, your voice, your boundaries, your unapologetic power. The very parts you thought were unspiritual, inappropriate, unlovable, those were the sacred codes. And suddenly, everything you used to fight becomes fuel. The rejection becomes redirection. The shame becomes a compass. The chaos becomes a portal. And the self you once tried to fix becomes the foundation of everything real. That's the paradox. When you stop trying to become someone better, you become someone whole. And whole people aren't always comfortable. They don't always smile on cue. They don't always say the right thing. But they radiate a kind of freedom you can't fake, a kind of presence that silences rooms, a kind of energy that doesn't beg to be understood, but invites you to meet yourself. That's the essence of shadow integration. You stop trying to control perception and start embodying truth. You realize that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's clarity. That anger isn't sin, it's sacred fire. That desire isn't shameful, it's divine language. And when you live like that, when you stop editing your humanity for the sake of fitting in, your life changes. Not just externally, but vibrationally. Your body feels lighter, your mind quieter, your relationships richer. You're not constantly exhausted because you're no longer resisting yourself, and people start to ask, what's different about you? But you can't explain it in a sentence. Because what shifted isn't just your behavior, it's your frequency. You're not reacting from wounds anymore. You're responding from wisdom. You're not chasing healing anymore. You're transmitting alignment. And that shift, that's what liberation feels like. Not escape, not perfection, but the unshakable peace of finally being all of yourself, everywhere you go. This is where you stop waiting for permission. You stop waiting for a sign that it's okay to be who you've always been underneath the layers, the masks, the trauma, and the borrowed identities. You stop seeking external validation for an internal revolution, because now you know the truth. Your shadow was never a flaw to fix. It was a guide to follow. It led you into the underworld, not to destroy you, but to initiate you, into authenticity, into depth, into presence. The kind of presence that can sit with grief without trying to fix it, that can hold rage without exploding, that can face shame without collapsing. That is real strength. That is power without domination. And now, when you look back at the person you used to be, the one who walked around split, uncertain, contorted just to be loved, you don't judge them. You thank them, because they carried the weight until you were ready to return home to yourself. And home, as it turns out, isn't a place. It's a state of being. It's radical self-ownership. It's remembering that you are both the wound and the healer, the trigger and the teacher, the storm and the anchor. And when you integrate that, truly, you walk differently. You speak less, but say more. You lose interest in convincing, and instead, start transmitting. And this world needs more of that. Not more noise, not more performance, not more pretend light, but real, embodied, gritty, grounded human beings who face their shadow and come out the other side not cleaner, but truer. So I'll leave you with this. What part of your shadow have you been avoiding that's actually the source of your deepest power? What truth have you labeled ugly or too much that might actually be the most sacred part of you? Drop it in the comments, not just for you, but for everyone else silently holding the same truth. This is where we stop hiding. This is where we build something real.